You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
Welcome to the HawgBeat Hour. I'm your host, Mason Choate, joined by managing editor of HawgBeat.com, Andrew Hutchinson, and recruiting expert at HawgBeat.com, Alex Trader. On today's episode of the HawgBeat Hour, we've got quite a bit to hit because we got to recap Arkansas's quote unquote spring game. It was basically a scrimmage, and as Arkansas weather does, it was moved inside due to weather. So fans weren't able to attend the Hog Fest. That was canceled. So that was an unfortunate situation, but we're going to talk about that. Arkansas got a commitment, a football commitment, maybe some more coming soon. We don't know. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some basketball, new updated rivals rankings for this 2022 class. And then we'll talk Razorback baseball as well, because the game starts on Friday, not Thursday this time. So a lot to get to, but we're going to start with football. Hutch, you made it out to the spring scrimmage, open scrimmage. I mean, you were struggling to figure out what to call it the day of, but what was that like compared to years past? Did you like that? Would you prefer them to have the whole spring game thing? What did you think of that?
One thing I could tell you I really would prefer is that they would have a traditional spring game so the U of A can provide the statistics, because that was not particularly fun having to try to figure out, okay, that was a 3-yard run, write it down. And then I have to afterwards go look at all the play-by-play and tally it all up. It was, it's like covering a high school football game where you don't have live statistics. When you cover Arkansas football, cover football in the SEC, you get kind of spoiled when it comes to that kind of stuff. But as far as the setup, it was the best of a worst case scenario. And it's not the first time they've had to move inside of the Walker Pavilion. Back in 2017, they did that. People may remember that. Unfortunately, as a spring game where Raleigh Williams suffered his career-ending injury, that was a devastating blow to that year's team. Luckily, it doesn't seem like anything quite that severe happened in this scrimmage, although there was a little bit of a scare with Torian Carter. The defensive tackle went down, I think, after the third play. But based on what Sam Pittman said afterwards, it doesn't sound like an ACL or anything that's going to cause him to miss any significant amount of time. So that was good. They came out relatively injury-free. But it was kind of just like, oh, okay, whatever. Just because the only people that were tackling were the third team offense and defense. So a bunch of guys, that you probably aren't going to see very much of this season. All the ones and twos, they thudded, like Sam Pittman likes to say, where they don't tackle to the ground. They just kind of they hit and stop. So it was a little bit kind of like the running backs, for example, like Rocket Sanders could have had way more rushing yards than he did, but he didn't get the opportunity to break tackles and things like that. So that made statting it a little bit difficult. It not as entertaining, in my opinion. They weren't really like moving the ball, the full length of the field, things like that, because they were just they shortened it up. I think they ran it from like the 35, like kind of the offense is 35 going toward an end zone. And it was a weird setup, not your typical spring red-white game. But really, if you really think about it and you're being honest with yourself, spring games really don't tell you a whole lot. That's just one practice out of 15. And I think fans put way too much stock into it, like it's the one thing that ever happened this spring. It's just one data point of 15 and no more or less significant than the other 14.
Okay, well, I agree with you there, but also it's still something to talk about because football is king. So we're going to talk about football. So Hutch, you posted your key takeaways or your takeaways from the spring scrimmage over at HawgBeat.com. But Alex Trader, I want to ask you, you were also there. What were some of your takeaways, your observations that you had?
Yeah, like Hutch said, it's tough to take much away from it because it is you're thudding up. You're not seeing that contact from the guys who are going to be playing this fall for the most part. You might see some third team guys be able to rise up if they're able to hit the weight room hard and maybe have some luck go their ways to where they're able to find the field and then maybe stick. But the biggest hit we saw from those first and second teams was from a guy in a non-contact jersey, and that's Jalen Catalon. He was able to knock a ball loose, which was kind of impressive. And we heard after that he's been told that he could be full go, but why take those hits if you don't have to? And I think that makes a lot of sense. And that seems like kind of what the staff was looking for in this game is why take the hits if you don't have to? You didn't see much in terms of the defense really you saw them swarming to the ball, but you didn't really see too much after that. And that's by design. But one guy I was really, really impressed with was on defense, and that's Drew Sanders. I mean, that guy out of Alabama, the transfer, is a stud at linebacker. He ran down Malik Hornsby, for God's sake. Not like a straight line catch him from behind, but you're beating a guy who usually never gets beat to that outside. That's really, really promising for Michael Scherer and that linebackers unit. And then you saw a lot of the guy that when we talked about who could make a big impact as a freshman this season, Jordan Crook was a guy that we all mentioned, and he was out there getting some serious reps and getting some praise after the game as well. So I think the defense really did show up in this scrimmage. You didn't see too many, even with the thudding, you didn't see too many broken plays for that defensive unit.
Hutch, I know that you've been very impressed with Drew Sanders as well. You had a story, your spring superlatives. I don't want to give stuff away, but you wrote about Drew Sanders in there. So just what have you seen from him as well?
Just a lot of athleticism. I mean, and this is absolutely no disrespect to Grant Morgan, who is maybe one of my favorite Razorbacks I've covered during my tenure covering Arkansas. Because he was undersized, didn't have the God-given abilities that you sometimes expected, why he was a 2-star walk-on, but he willed himself to become a second-team All-American and a first-team All-SEC guy. But that said, Drew Sanders has those things that Grant Morgan didn't have. He has the size, he has the athleticism, the speed, and that just really excites me. That's why I think throw Bumper Pool in there, who's back, and that could be a really salty 2-linebacker duo there. And especially if you could throw in like a Pooh Paul that comes on and develops as a redshirt freshman, that could be even a better group of linebackers. And last year's was really, really good. Maybe one of the more underrated groups, position groups in the country, in my opinion, and definitely the SEC. So. That I really like what I've seen from Drew Sanders. Plus, I really like what I've heard from his teammates. I mean, we'll ask an open-ended question to offensive players, whether that be KJ Jefferson, Trey Knox, whoever, and be like, hey, who on the defensive side of the ball is standing out to you? And almost every single one of them has said Drew Sanders. Drew Sanders. He's all over the field, and he's tough to block, is how Trey Knox described him. And so, to me, that tells me a lot, and that's why I'm really excited to see what he looks like, say in a real game where we can finally watch him tackle for the first time.
So Sanders is a name that I heard a lot during spring ball, but another name, probably a name I heard more than any, was Rashad Dobinion, and this is from people on staff watching him at practice every day. And Alex, I want to ask you, Dobinion, I mean, you've already got a pretty loaded running back room. Of course, Dominique Johnson hasn't really practiced at all this spring. He had offseason surgery, so he didn't have to compete with Dominique Johnson, but you're still looking at Rocket Sanders and AJ Green, who are two guys that are going to play. So where do you see Dobinion fitting in? And I mean, at some point, talent is worth a lot, and I think he's got a lot of talent.
Yeah, you're certainly not hurting for it at that position. If you're Arkansas, Dobinion was really, really solid coming out of high school. You could tell watching his film. Doing my recruiting roundup, it seemed every single week there was another Twitter highlight that had him, jumping over a kid or running over a kid and taking it to the house. You can't necessarily teach that stuff. So I think he'll certainly, if he's able to keep up the solid spring he's had, and carry that into the fall and into the summer and continue to develop, then I think you're definitely going to see him, maybe another 4-headed monster if you're Arkansas. Maybe he fills in that Traylon Smith role where you're not necessarily getting the bulk of the carries, but you're getting enough carries to make an impact and to give the defense a different look at the position, because it's so hard to prepare to tackle even the 7 or 8, 9, 10 skilled position guys that are going to be in a game. Every time you can add to that, it's another wrinkle that the defense has to deal with. And I think, we saw last year, the staff isn't afraid to use it. Kendall Briles isn't afraid to use that wrinkle. And it could really help out Arkansas in keeping those backs fresh as well.
Okay. One thing that I think a lot of people want to hear, because they love to hear your lists or the things that are coming out of spring ball. I mean, we talked about it, how basically what's going to come out of spring ball is not a lot because, as Alex mentioned, they're not tackling as much. The contact is limited, so it's hard to tell what's going on. Hutch, you talked about how it's hard to keep stats because of that stuff, but Hutch, where do you think Arkansas needs to improve between now and the start of the season? Because you can always look at something and say, well, this position better get better because they need to get that before the season starts. You look at after the season, we talked about defensive line. That's a position that they've got to improve at. So at this point, you've watched the spring scrimmage, you've watched the practices, Hutch. Where do you think Arkansas really needs to improve between now and August?
Yeah, I mean, I think defensive line is the obvious answer there, just because Sam Pittman hasn't even tried to hide the fact that they're still trying to pursue a couple of defensive tackles in the transfer portal. They've got Jordan Dominic coming in from the portal. Landon Jackson was able to start going through some individual drills at practice late in spring, but was nowhere close to being full go as he comes back from a torn ACL suffered at LSU. But I think the position right now that I've got my eye on the most close is wide receiver. You've got a lot of talent there. I think that Jaden Hazelwood, I think, is going to be a very good player for Arkansas. I do. But he was kind of nursing a shoulder injury throughout the spring, was never live, and we just never saw like those amazing, like, holy cow, this guy's incredible type plays. And honestly, we didn't really see that from any of them. We saw flashes, but Warren Thompson, he did a really nice job of getting open, and make and where the quarterbacks could get him the ball, but he sometimes dropped it. He struggled with some drops. Ketron Jackson is a guy that if you get the ball around him, he's probably going to catch it. But he also would have periods of practice where he would just completely disappear. I'd get through an entire practice and be like, well, was Ketron there? I didn't remember seeing him. And that's not a good sign if you're supposed to be a big time mega receiver, because that never happened with Traylon Burks. You knew exactly where Traylon Burks was every practice. And honestly, it was like that with Trey Knox whenever he was a freshman. He was like, oh, this guy's making plays all over the place. And we just haven't really seen that with any of these wide receivers. None of them have really stepped up to fill that go-to role. I think they may have an issue of getting open sometimes, getting off of press coverage and just finding ways to get open. Because there were so many times, not just during the spring scrimmage that everyone saw, but in practice too, where the quarterbacks had to scramble because there was nowhere to throw the ball. When protection was solid, they just didn't have anywhere to throw it to. And so I think that's my biggest concern right now. And I think there's, more evidence of that in that Sam Pittman wants to go add another transfer wide receiver from the portal. So it's something to keep an eye on, but I'm not like ready to hit, the major panic button on this, because again, they've got a ton of potential. Ketron Jackson, 4-star recruit. Warren Thompson, 4-star recruit. Jaden Hazelwood, 5-star recruit. I've liked what I've seen from Malik Hornsby. He's probably made the most wow plays at wide receiver of the entire group. So you've got talent. It's just a matter of them putting it all together and figuring it all out.
Well, on the topic of Malik Hornsby, I don't know if we can agree, but I feel like the position that we should be most confident in after spring ball is probably quarterback. I mean, KJ Jefferson's your guy. Hutch, can you agree with that? Or is there another position where you're like, I feel more confident here than I even do in KJ Jefferson?
With KJ, the concern is that he's a mobile quarterback in the SEC. And while he is a big dude and can run over people, you do leave yourself open for potential injuries. And I don't feel near as good about the depth at quarterback as I do at running back. I mean, Alex has already touched on this a little bit. That running back room is loaded. I think it really could be a four-headed monster, like Alex said. I think Rashad Dobinion is going to command some carries as a true freshman. I think, we know what Dominic Johnson can do, and he didn't even get to go through spring ball because of an injury. Rocket Sanders, I believe, is improved. He's, as Sam Pittman said, has become, a hard runner, evolved into a running back. Like he knows how to make reads and knows where he's supposed to run and take the ball. So I really think that group is probably the strongest on the team, because I think they have four bona fide SEC running backs, with AJ Green being the fourth. That if one of those guys goes down, God forbid, they're gonna be okay. I'm not ready to say that yet about the quarterback position. As great as KJ is, he may be the best player on the team. You can make a case for Bumper Pool, maybe make a case for Jalen Catalon, but KJ Jefferson may be the most important player on the team, and I don't think that's particularly debatable.
Well, I probably should have said, I mean, if we're saying nobody gets hurt, this is the position that we're most confident in. But either way, no, I think that you're right there. Before we wrap up the segment, though, I saw people on Twitter, and this, when you say you saw on Twitter, that's not a good way to start something, but I saw something on Twitter on Saturday during the spring scrimmage. People were able to watch it, and there were people saying like this Arkansas team, like they're a playoff football team. They're so good, and it's just, can we all together right now agree that you cannot say Arkansas is a playoff team off of one spring scrimmage inside of the indoor practice facility?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I saw some people say the exact opposite, going, "Man, this team sucks. They're not going to win 6 games." So it's a classic spring overreaction, one way or the other. It's just going to confirm whatever you thought ahead of time. If you thought this was going to be a 10-win team, you come away thinking, "Oh my God, this is definitely a 10-win team." If you think this team's going to struggle to make a bowl game, you come away thinking, "Man, this team might not make a bowl game." So spring, it comes with overreaction. That's just part of it.
Well, Alex, I know that you're a big hater of preseason rankings, so I'm sure that this next little period until the start of the season, you're gonna be like twitching in your room.
Yeah, I'll be checking out some spring games from different schools, trying to formulate my own rankings based on what I've seen. But I the idea of preseason rankings are great, right? You get a week 1 matchup where it's number 10 Arkansas against number 12, 13 Cincinnati. It's great in theory, and that's exactly why it's there, so that the games can be promoted in that way. But it just doesn't. We have no idea what this Arkansas team is going to look like, even covering it as closely as we do. We have no idea how they're going to stack up. It's not a done deal yet. We haven't seen the new components come together on a field in that game fashion. And we certainly don't know, the same thing about Cincinnati, or the same thing about every other team in the country. So that's why you see teams rise in from not being ranked at the start of the season into that top 10 at the end of the year, because you just don't know at this point. So I think they're not going anywhere, and I understand that, but I do think, when you beat a team that constantly gets ranked highly, like a Texas, even for the last couple of years, Florida State finds themselves in the upper echelon of those rankings, despite not proving anything since they won a national championship or since they went to the playoff. You have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap this up. So if you want any more information on what happened at spring practices during the spring scrimmage, go over to HawgBeat.com. There's plenty more that we did not hit. There's a lot of stories that Hutch did. Alex did some stuff. I did one story. So congratulations to me. Good job, Mason. And go check all that out. It's worth a subscription, and it's over at HawgBeat.com. Okay. Up next, we're going to talk some football recruiting here on the HawgBeat Hour.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
All right, we're back here on the HawgBeat Hour. Mason Choate, Andrew Hutchinson, and Alex Trader with you. So we talked spring game for football, or spring scrimmage. Spring scrimmage. It was not a spring game. Now we got to talk some recruiting. So Arkansas gets a commitment from 4-star offensive tackle Luke Brown. Alex Trader, you did a film breakdown on him. Just what do you think of him from watching his film?
I think it's a heck of a pickup for Sam Pittman and Cody Kennedy. You watch his film, and what you see immediately, you can't miss it, is the physicality that he plays with. He goes out, and every single play he's looking to put his man on the ground, and that you need that nastiness if you want to be a top offensive lineman. You have to have that grit in that. I don't only want to beat this guy in that I'm doing my job, but I want to put him on the ground and make sure that he doesn't want to come back and try and challenge me the next play. And you see that a lot. Solid pass setting, really where you saw his specialty in that film was the run blocking. So maybe you want to see a little bit more of those pass blocking highlights on the huddle. I know it's tough to get a pass blocking highlight that gives the same effect as a pancake, but you want to see that. But in the run game, he gets off the ball very quickly, has a low get off, is able to drive into his opponent, get his hands on before the defender has a chance to react. It's really well taught football from his coaches, I guess you want to say. Great technique on his part in that run blocking game, and he's able to physically dominate the competition. And you do like to see that if you're a 4-star lineman, that they're dominating the kids they're playing in high school.
So Brown is a Tennessee guy, and it looks like he had a pretty good offer list. Hutch, what do you know about him? I mean, you wrote the story about his commitment. I'm sure you've looked into him a little bit. Tell us what you know.
Yeah, I mean, a really impressive offer sheet. I can't remember off the top. I mean, several Power 5 offers, SEC offers, but there's a reason he's a 4-star recruit on Rivals. And that to me is that the biggest thing is we're starting to see some Sam Pittman type offensive line recruits. These are the guys that I think maybe fans expected Arkansas to get right away when Sam Pittman took over. And I think that was maybe a little bit unrealistic just because Arkansas was so bad whenever he took over. But now that they're starting to get some momentum on the field, you're starting to see it, in recruiting as well. And the fact that Arkansas offered this kid back on, I want to say March 5th, he came for a junior day. Arkansas extended the offer. At the time, he had like a top 10, top 12 list, and it didn't even have Arkansas in it. And Arkansas was able to make up that ground very quickly, like about a month and a half later, and boom, he's committed. You saw that happen with Carson Dean, the last commitment, a 4-star linebacker. He visits, gets an offer, and like 2 or 3 days later, he commits. That to me says a lot about this staff, how they're able to close on guys. And plus, I do want to mention this is the third 4-star offensive lineman Arkansas has landed in the last in 4 classes. Plus, they could add some more. We've talked about Connor Stroh quite a bit. They're probably going to be in on some other offensive linemen, high caliber guys. But 3 and 4 years compared to the previous 4 years, they landed exactly 0. And that was coincided with a time that Sam Pittman was not here. Before that, they landed several with Sam Pittman as the offensive line coach. So just further evidence of Arkansas improving on the recruiting trail.
So there's a story from Eric Lammers, the national recruiting analyst over at Rivals. He talked with Brown, and I thought it was really interesting. Brown said the opportunity for linemen is like no other in the country, and the future's bright in Arkansas. And he said, under Coach Pittman, I believe anything's possible. So I feel like that's the culture that we're starting to know and we're starting to understand under Sam Pittman is these players are buying in big time, and it's turning in not only to the players that were already on the roster when he took over, but now it's these recruits that are coming in, and not just recruits, like these high quality. We're talking about Luke Brown, a 4-star offensive tackle, 6'6", 300 pounds, got offers from Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Auburn. Like this is a big time recruit. And not only is he picking Arkansas because it's an SEC West team, he's picking Arkansas because he believes in Arkansas and he believes in Sam Pittman. How big is that, Hutch? Because we're looking at it 3 years ago. Arkansas was probably the worst Power 5 team in all of college football.
There is no maybe about it. They were the worst Power 5 team in college football and arguably one of the worst teams in the FBS. I mean, I don't need to remind everyone what happened when Arkansas played Colorado State played San Jose State, played Western Kentucky. Did not go well. It did not go well. So yeah, it's taken some time to build it up, but we're starting to see kind of the fruits of Sam Pittman and his staff's labor on the recruiting trail and also just on the field. I mean, 9 wins last season. That was pretty cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was cool. It was good for business, so that's for sure. And but okay, so let's stick with recruiting. Alex, there's going to be some recruits on campus this weekend. Tell us the names, what you know about them.
Yeah, so starting off, just he tweeted about 30 minutes ago, Tavion Galloway, the number 7 tight end per Rivals in the 2024 class. Rivals 250 guy, 5.8 4-star, just landed in Arkansas, and he tweeted out earlier this week that he'd be in town for a visit. That he's out of Ohio, so you have I guess Manny Powell, who ended up down in Fayetteville for his senior year. You might have that kind of similar trail going on. But if there's one position you feel confident that Arkansas is going to be able to bring a guy in, at this point right now, it has to be tight end, given what we saw for 2023. So you have to feel pretty good about Dow Loggins getting to meet with a Rivals 250 guy today in the class of 2024. Also in that class, you have Peyton Pierce, who's a top linebacker in that class, really one of Arkansas's main targets. And he would be a massive guy to get in with as well, and to be able to keep that relationship up and potentially make it into his top schools down the road. And then, you also have, you had a pretty good big quarterback last weekend in Jaden Rashada. Well, you have another one in the 2023 class this weekend, and that's Georgia quarterback Malachi Singleton. Has drawn, Justin Fields comparisons and is from that same area as Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence were. That would be a big pickup as well. Rated a 5.5 on Rivals right now, but a lot of buzz around this kid, and Arkansas seems really, really interested. Also worth noting, he's committing Monday, so he'll be in town Saturday, committing Monday. You can go ahead and connect those dots however you may like. But another big player in that recruitment is Gus Malzahn and UCF. So it's looking like those are 2 of his top schools right now. There's no telling for sure. I did put a future cast in that you can go check out over at HawgBeat.com for where I think Singleton's going to end up. But right now we'll have either way, wherever he ends up, that'll definitely be on our premium message board over at HawgBeat. So go check that out.
Also, Arkansas did offer a defensive line transfer from Nebraska. Hutch, you were talking about that before the show. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so it looks like they've offered a guy named Casey Rogers. He is a 6'5", 295-pound defensive lineman. To me, that screams defensive tackle, and that's what Sam Pittman has said multiple times they would like to go get. It's a guy that, based on just some really quick research, it looks like he was maybe a projected starter at Nebraska, but that may have also just been because they have a severe lack of depth on the defensive line, just like Arkansas does. And so it may not be like a big time major, John Ridgeway type defensive tackle, but honestly, based on what we've heard about, Isaiah Nichols and Torian Carter during spring ball, those guys might be your top 2 guys, and you may just need some depth. I think this guy would be some quality depth based on what I've read, but I don't know if he's one of those guys that you would count on, saying, hey, come in and start right away. I mean, he could surprise us. Who knows what, the difference is between Arkansas and Nebraska and everything, but that's kind of just my immediate, first thoughts, as I, first start, researching this guy.
All right. Well, I think that'll wrap up our recruiting talk for football. And up next, we're going to talk some more recruiting. But for basketball, some new rankings. Hogs are sitting pretty in the 2022 rankings, as everybody knows. But the new rankings for Rivals, at least, makes it a little bit more exciting. So we'll talk about that here on the HawgBeat Hour.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
Okay, we're back here on the HawgBeat Hour. We're going to talk some basketball recruiting this segment. So Anthony Black becomes a 5-star in the final Rivals 150 for the 2022 class, and he officially signed with Arkansas on Wednesday. So the class is complete. Arkansas has 3 McDonald's All-Americans, 3 5-stars, according to Rivals. And you just look at the rankings, Hutch, what really changed in the rankings for these 6 recruits for Arkansas compared to what it was? I know that Black picked up his 5th star, and I believe Jordan Walsh fell, didn't he?
Yeah, but he's still a 5-star. I think the biggest story is the fact that Anthony Black got that 5th star. That wasn't a given. I know other services already had him as a 5-star, but on Rivals he had been, I think, the highest ranked 4-star in the Rivals 150, which, it's just like, come on, man, like let's get him bumped up to that 5-star status. And sure enough, he had a solid showing in the McDonald's All-American game. And that, I think, helped him kind of get that boost up to, I want to say, number 19. Jordan Walsh fell from like 19 to 24. So he stayed in the top 25, remained a 5-star. But he's a guy that he didn't necessarily shine in the McDonald's All-American game, but he had a really good showing at the Geico National Tournament, where all like those prep schools like Montverde and Oak Hill and Link Academy, like where Jordan is, they all got together and played a big national tournament, and Jordan Walsh's team finished runner-up, and Walsh had a big tournament, so that was good. That's really the biggest, most notable thing, other than the fact that despite not really having much anywhere to go, Nick Smith Jr. has moved up in the rankings once again and is now the number 2 overall prospect in the 2022 class. Makes him easily the highest ranked player of the Rivals era to ever sign with Arkansas. He had been tied with Al Jefferson, who signed with Arkansas, never made it to campus because he got drafted in the NBA. But it just kind of shows you just how special of a player he is. I wrote a story about it on HawgBeat, and really the only guy you can really compare him to, just all time. I mean, he's number 1 in the recruiting era, but that only goes back to like 2003. He's the highest ranked player probably of all time, right up there with Corliss Williamson, who some people, depending on who you talk to coming out of high school, had him number 1 or number 2 overall. The other guy that was in that contention, you might have heard of him, named Jason Kidd. That's pretty lofty comparisons for him, because we all know how Corliss Williamson did. I mean, won a national championship, finished runner-up another time. Probably won't have an opportunity to do that because Nick Smith is probably a one-and-done guy. Only get 1 year with him, but if he could get Arkansas back to the Final Four, like I think some people's expectation is, then he'll be mentioned in the same breath as Corliss Williamson, as an in-state kid who super highly talented, could have gone anywhere he wanted, stayed home and led Arkansas to tremendous success on the court.
So you had the opportunity to go watch Nick Smith play at least once. For the people who haven't had the chance to watch him play and they just know his name, what does he provide to Arkansas coming into this next season? I mean, what kind of role do you see him playing? What kind of player is he?
He's going to be a big-time player for Arkansas. I think that's without a question the case. He could score. He could score I mean, if his shot's not falling, like the one time I went and saw him play, his shot wasn't falling. I think he missed all of his 3-point attempts, I want to say. But then in the Jordan Brand Classic, one of those All-American games he played in last week, I think he was 5 of 7 from beyond the arc. So he's fully capable of lighting it up from deep. He also has a nice mid-range game, and he can also get to the basket and finish around the rim, or get fouled and go to the free throw line, where he has a really nice free throw stroke as well. So a really talented scorer. But probably the thing I was most impressed with by watching him play, this was when he was at North Little Rock, playing alongside Khalil Ware, the other 5-star kid going to Oregon. He was just kind of a floor general. Like he just never seems super frazzled. And this was a game where they fell behind early against Fort Smith Northside, a team that they should not ever trail because they were not very good. And he just never really seems, concerned. Like he was just very calm, cool, collected, made some really nice passes, did what his team needed to do to get that lead. And it was very quiet. Like, I mean, you look up, they're down by 6 or 7. You look up a couple minutes later and they're up by 30. So that just kind of shows you that he's just playing on another level where it doesn't even look like he's trying that hard, but he puts up a really solid stat line.
So the other recruits don't really get much attention, and that's Darian Ford, Joseph Pinion, Barry Dunning Jr. Alex, does this maybe remind you kind of a little bit of the 2020 class? Maybe one of these guys can be a Devo Davis, where he's kind of the odd man out, but he might come into Arkansas and, make a difference and play some meaningful minutes. Because you look at it, according to Rivals, Devo Davis was 129 in the 2020 class. KK Robinson, 65, Jalen Williams, 59, Moses Moody, 56. So of these three guys, Ford, Pinion, Dunning, is there one that you think might be able to have an impact, kind of like a Devo Davis in this class?
I think I was really impressed. I didn't get to see any of them play full game action, but once again, writing the roundup, you kind of see some of these stats come through it. And I believe there was a game with Barry Dunning where he had like 27 rebounds and 20 plus points as well. Just really, you have to be so athletic to be able to do that on a basketball court against your peers. I could go out there and maybe do that against my sister's fifth grade team, but to do it against people who are the same age as you, the same classification, it's really, really impressive. I know him and Darian Ford both won Mr. Basketball. It really, I think any of these guys could break out. Joseph Pinion as well could break out and potentially be that guy to find a role on the team. I don't think any of these guys are necessarily one and dones either. So you might have that time to figure it out and to say, hey, I'm going to be here freshman year. This team has the talent to get to, arguably has the talent to get to a national championship. If I stay another year, then I could be one of those big pieces for that team. And I think there's always that potential, especially when you're bringing in guys who are as talented as these three are.
Okay, last thing. I've seen that the Amani Bates from Memphis, he's drawn interest from Arkansas. Hutch, you've got the numbers. I don't know if you have them pulled up right now, but I think you probably know the basics off the top of your head. Would it work for Arkansas to bring in one more transfer? I believe they'd have to have at least one or two more guys leave, right?
Yeah. So basically, right now, I think we talked about this on the last episode. If Jalen Williams returns, someone else has to leave, whether that be, basically you're down to Jackson Robinson, Kamani Johnson, and Devo Davis. So one of those guys would have to leave, or one of these signees would have to be let out of their letter of intent, or one of these other transfers would not be able to come because there's not enough room. So I would be very surprised if a guy of Bates' stature, a guy who is a top 1, 2, or 3 players in the country, would want to come to a team like Arkansas where they've got so many incredible parts. I think he's probably going to want to go somewhere where he can maybe be closer to the guy instead of a guy on the team. So, and plus, I don't necessarily think, I mean, who knows how much of this is true, but I've read some stuff where he may have been a locker room cancer. Memphis kind of struggled with him on the floor. So I don't know if he would be a guy you really want to bring in to be a part of this group that you have such high, lofty expectations.
Okay. Well, that settles that. Andrew Hutchinson, Basketball Insider. He confirmed on this podcast, said Amani Bates is a locker room cancer. So,
well, that's what I've read. I don't know if that's the case, but that's what I've read.
It's okay. After this, I'm gonna go clip that audio to make it sound like that, so it's fine. Anyways, that's our basketball recruiting talk, and for the first time in weeks, we get to talk Razorback baseball here on the HawgBeat Hour. So, Alex Trader, you're going to be gone. You don't know baseball, so have a good one. And Hutch and I are going to talk baseball with you guys here next on the HawgBeat Hour.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
Okay, Arkansas baseball. All right, we're back here on the HawgBeat Hour talking Razorback baseball for the first time in a long time. Just a reminder, if you miss anything Razorback baseball related, or you just want more Razorback baseball content, you can go listen to the Diamond Hawks podcast. It is on the HawgBeat YouTube, and you can listen to it there, part of the Hit That Line podcast network as well. And go listen to that. We have some great interviews with some former players, some current players. Andrew Hutchinson is a recurring guest, so we're gonna have to have you back on at some point. Maybe when like there's some kind of TV issue, we'll have you on and you can rant some more. So, but as far as Arkansas baseball goes, they're coming off of a couple of midweek wins over Arkansas State. Hutch, last time we talked Razorback baseball, I think that goes back to like right after the Kentucky series on this podcast. Do you remember that?
I can't remember because there was such it was such a busy time with basketball going on and spring football. It was a crazy time, and but it is good to finally be talking baseball again because it does feel like it's been a really long time.
Okay, so as far as the midweek against Arkansas State goes, we're not gonna go super in depth on this, but you look at it on Tuesday, they got 4 pitchers out there. Of course, I mean Arkansas won 10-1 and then 10-3, but they got 4 pitchers out there. So Ramage, his second midweek start on Tuesday in a row, and then you got Tress, Adamiak, Nick Griffin. But I really liked what I saw from Will McIntyre on Wednesday. I mean, before last week, he hadn't pitched since 2020. What have you seen from Will McIntyre, Hutch?
I mean, he's just gone out there and pitched. Like he doesn't have the stuff that's probably going to wow you. Like say a Jackson Wiggins or a Hagen Smith, or even as crazy as it sounds, a Cole Ramage. Like he doesn't have the elite data points, I don't think, but there's something to the ability to just be able to go out there and pitch. And it seems like that's what he's done. That seemed like what he did way back in 2020 before the pandemic hit. He actually started one of the not the last game before the pandemic, but the game before that. And he threw like 6 2/3 scoreless against a Grand Canyon team that was pretty good that year. So he's a guy that just goes out there and gives you innings without really giving up runs. The thing that is a little bit weird is that back in 2020, whenever he pitched, his thing was he just threw strikes. I mean, he pounded the strike zone and was going to get you, outs or give up hits. This year, he has walked quite a few batters. I think he walked 4 against Arkansas State in 4 2/3. As Dave Van Horn said after the game, that's just too many. Usually that's going to come back and bite you. It only led to 1 run against Arkansas State, so he was able to work around it. He got a couple of double play balls and stuff like that. But they didn't seem too frustrated. And I mean, there's a reason he let him go 4 2/3 innings, despite those 4 walks, is that usually those walks, it wasn't like he was going out there and walking a guy on 4 pitches, nowhere close to the zone. He was just missing the strike zone. I mean, there were a couple of full counts that ended up in walks, things like that. So he's just a guy that is kind of knocking on the door of being a contributor. And who knows? I mean, maybe he just contributes on the midweeks and continues getting better. He's a hard worker. I mean, he redshirted last year. You don't really see a whole lot of red shirts in college baseball, especially at the SEC level. So I think that kind of is a credit to him for working. He had a really good summer, I want to say, in the Northwoods League. He's a guy I could see having a role on this pitching staff maybe in 2023 or beyond. So a guy to watch and keep an eye on. I don't know how much he'll help this year, but again, he could surprise us all.
Well, Dave Van Horn said that he's going to dress out for the series against Texas A&M this weekend, and I believe that's the first time he's going to hit the road with the team this season. You were in the press conference. Can you confirm that for me?
Yeah, so Dave said it's the first time he's traveled. I think he meant for an SEC series because he didn't travel all last year. And then, of course, 2020, there were no SEC series. But apparently he did travel for the event in Houston in 2020. I guess that's the Shriners Classic or whatever. He did travel for that. But he's going to travel with the team. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be on the 27-man roster. Dave said they could travel, 30 guys or something. Guys like, trying to think of who else he said, Mark Adamiak or Isaac Bracken. Those guys will probably all make the trip, but only a couple of those will be able to have a spot on the roster where they're eligible to pitch against the Aggies.
Okay. Another one of the storylines from the midweek, and it's been a storyline the past 2 midweeks, is Brady Slavins. So Tuesday he goes 4 for 5, had 4 RBI. He had a grand slam. So there you go. 3 runs scored. But then you look at it Wednesday, he goes 0 for 4. But Slavins as a whole, I put out a stat on Twitter since the Mississippi State series, he's hitting like 467 and he had like 24 RBI, I think. So he's been getting better, especially because he struggled for a while there. What have you seen from Slavins, Hutch? And do you think that Brady Slavins of last year is back, or do you think we're not there yet?
Well, first, I want to make a point to mention this. And Mason, I know, had class yesterday, was able to watch the whole game. Brady actually fouled off a pitch that came up and bounced off his face. And he actually had to come out of the game, got replaced by Zach Gregory, who didn't start because it like went off his like right eye, and the doctors were looking at it. It doesn't look too bad. I don't know what kind of injury he has, maybe kind of a black eye potentially, but he was hurting, which was unfortunate because, as you said, he has been mashing lately. And I do think that this is the pre-injury Brady Slavins of 2021 because people forget, they just remember him at the end of the year in the postseason where he really struggled. But before that injury, before he got hurt in the SEC tournament, he was hitting 300 for the season and did really well against SEC competition, hit a lot of home runs, has a ton of power. He would probably have way more home runs than he does now if it wasn't for the fact that Bahamas Stadium is positioned where the wind permanently blows in from right. If it hadn't been for that, he'd probably have double the home runs. So he is definitely hitting the ball hard. Plus, in Tuesday's game, it wasn't just the fact that he went 4 for 5 with a grand slam, which is great, but his 3 singles were to all different fields. I mean, he pulled a single, he hit a single up the middle, and he also had a single the other way. Plus, his grand slam was the other way. That's what you like to see from a hitter, an elite hitter, being able to use all fields and not just try to pull everything. So that's what I think happened to Brady when he went through those struggles against Kentucky and Missouri, especially. He was just trying to swing as hard as he could and hit the ball as far as he could. And it didn't go well. He struck out like in 10 of 17 at bats. So I think we're starting to see the Brady Slavins that we all thought could be a high round draft pick.
Yeah, I think that is it's very valuable for Arkansas. It's one of those bats that you needed to get going, especially here as you're hitting the second half of the season. You look at another bat you need to get going is probably Robert Moore. He's one of your guys who's going to be a first round draft pick, likely. I mean, he's got to pick it up. If he keeps playing like he is, he might drop. But the talent with Moore. So that's one of the big things in baseball is if the talent's there, then you're good. But let's look ahead to Texas A&M, Hutch. So this team is, I believe they're 23-13 on the season. They're 8-7 in conference play. The past 2 midweeks, they've beaten Texas State and Dallas Baptist, 2 ranked teams. And then last weekend, they beat Georgia, who is a very good baseball team this season. So it's a hot Texas A&M team. Arkansas is going down there to College Station. What are you expecting from this series? Because Arkansas is going to get Texas A&M's best shot.
Yeah, because Texas A&M is right on the verge of probably being a top 25 team. I don't think they're ranked in any of the polls this week, but if they win 2 out of 3 against an Arkansas team after winning that midweek game against Dallas Baptist, after a road series win at Georgia last weekend, they will definitely be ranked if they could get it done. And so it's going to be a competitive series. As you mentioned, they are really playing well lately. They have a really good offense. I know we just saw a really good offense of LSU, but this is right up there with them. They Jim Schlossnagle is in his first year at Texas A&M as a head coach, the former TCU head coach. He has rebuilt that program with a lot of transfers. I mean, you look at up and down the lineup, I think Jack Moss leads them in batting average. That's an Arizona State transfer, whose name I had actually heard mentioned a little bit with Arkansas potentially when he was in the portal, because I think he has some ties to the state. So maybe that'll be some extra motivation for him. They've got I think their leading home run hitter is a transfer from UTSA. They've got I think a catcher maybe from Oregon State or something. They've got a pitcher transferred in from Texas Tech. So they've got a lot of transfers on this team, more so than probably most places. So gonna be an interesting matchup for Arkansas. It's gonna be, in my eyes, I see it as kind of a strength on strength matchup, because they have a really good offense. Arkansas has a really good pitching staff. Those two are going to be going head to head. And what may make the difference is kind of what the other part of your game does. Texas A&M's pitching versus Arkansas's hitting. And I think that's where Arkansas maybe has the edge, is that the potential for Arkansas's offense is there to be just as good as an LSU or a Texas A&M or any other team in the country. We just haven't seen it yet. You feel like they're going to eventually have a weekend where they put up 30 runs. I feel like that's going to happen at some point. Is it this weekend at Texas A&M? I don't know. Van Horn seems to think that the wind will be blowing out just by the way the Bluebell Park down there is positioned. And if that's the case, maybe we see that happen. But then again, that wind blowing out didn't seem to help them against Florida a couple of weekends ago.
No, it didn't. It did help Florida, though. There were a lot of home runs hit by the Gators, but at some point it's got to no longer be the wind. I mean, it seems like the excuse all season has been, well, the wind. I don't know. At some point, your lineup is good and they hit the ball no matter what. And I mean, you can't really complain with Arkansas because they've won a lot of games. They're number 3 team in the country. So it's just, I don't know. You're right. The lineup has not, or number 4 team, my bad. The lineup has not lived up to the expectation, but that's what happens when you come off of a 50-plus win season and your expectation is that high. So as far as Arkansas goes, real quick before we end it, Hutch, just how are you feeling? How are you feeling about the team? You said the starting pitching's good. You feel like this team is living up to your preseason expectation?
I mean, they've actually exceeded my preseason expectation. If you look at it, I had nailed the first 4 SEC series, and I predicted them to lose the series against LSU, and all they did is went out there and swept the Tigers. So they're exceeding my expectations. The offense has actually been better than last year statistically, which is really surprising if you look at it. But the pitching has been way better than I maybe expected. So maybe this team is maybe better built for the postseason. They don't have quite the home run hitting ability as you maybe expected them to, and definitely not as much as last year. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you don't have to rely on the long ball to score runs. They seem to be doing it in other ways, and that may be better suited. That plus starting pitchers who can give you 6 innings an outing might help you out in the postseason.
All right. Well, it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series against the Aggies. Friday's game, 7:30 on the SEC Network, nationally televised. Congratulations, Andrew Hutchinson. And we'll talk about that one next week. If you want more baseball coverage, go to HawgBeat.com. We will have you covered because HawgBeat does Arkansas baseball coverage better than anybody. And go listen to the Diamond Hawks podcast as well. But for that, thank you, Andrew Hutchinson. Thank you, Alex Trader. Thank you for listening to the HawgBeat Hour.